All right, so good morning, all. My name is Kevin Bennett. I'm a part of the Mental Health Awareness Project. We provide mental health workshops where we educate people of all ages about mental health and how to advocate for themselves and those around them. February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and we have here Lindsey, who will be teaching us about SAVI and healthy teen relationships. I will be turning off the comments for this interview. Once we're finished, I will turn the comments back on for any additional questions. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so Lindsey, can you tell us about yourself and what SAVI is?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Hi, my name is Lindsay. I'm the Training, Outreach, and Education Supervisor for the Mount Sinai Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention Program. I have been in the field of nonviolence, working to combat gender-based, interpersonal, power-based violence for about 5 years now.
Wow.
Um, I began in the field as an advocate, a volunteer advocate, and I'll share a little bit about how we can do that in our program. Um, so I would respond to the emergency room, and as I got more involved in my local rape crisis center, I became more involved in the work. I have done advocacy in the emergency room and police stations. I have done hotline work. I have worked at shelters and safe houses. And then I came to Mount Sinai program in 2019. So I'm currently the supervisor. So I am helping to dispatch educators to different parts of the community and help educate around consent, healthy relationships, what is intimate partner violence, what is sexual assault, and really empower people to make a difference in their community. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Mount Sinai Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention Program. We call it SAVI. It has been around since the 80s. It is a great program that is completely free and confidential to the public, meaning that anyone in New York City who calls for support, there's no charge. People don't ask about insurance.
Wow.
People don't ask about immigration status. I think that we see people maybe in their teens and up. So even teens can reach out for support. Our program includes emergency room advocates. So people who are 21 and up can go through our 40-hour volunteer training. And that means after someone's been sexually assaulted or experienced intimate partner violence and they go to the emergency room for support, an advocate comes out to sit with them and to emotionally support them, help guide them through their rights and options right there in the emergency room, whether or not they want to press charges, whether or not they want to seek aftercare like counseling. We have a clinical staff, so we do one-on-one counseling for survivors of human trafficking, intimate partner violence, and sexual assault. There are groups, there are individual counseling. We are still going on, even in the pandemic. We have a great clinical staff who've adapted. We are doing everything by Zoom these days. And yeah, then we have the education team, which is what I'm a part of.
Wow, thank you. That's definitely very educational, and it sounds like you have definitely a lot of experience. Thank you so much for coming here today and allow us the opportunity to interview you. For my next question, I would like to ask, what are some core elements of healthy relationships versus some signs of an unhealthy relationship?
Thank you for that question. So some of the signs a healthy relationship should include, right? These are some things that a healthy
Yes.
relationship should include is trust, right? Mutual trust. So that's not just giving someone trust, but also being trusted back. Communication, respect, boundaries. We're going to talk about boundaries. Shared responsibility. So even when one person maybe makes more money or one person has a car and the other person doesn't, or one person has insurance, the other person doesn't, there's conversation around who's doing what. If there's childcare, then there's a conversation about who's doing what with childcare and with chores and tasks in the
Yes. Yeah.
household. So that's kind of what goes into that. Accountability. So when someone hurts somebody else's feelings, they apologize and take accountability for a mistake and then try to correct it, which is really important. And privacy as well. So having two separate cell phones with passwords, having time apart. I think especially when we talk about young people, they tend to spend a lot of time together when they're going through their first couple of relationships in their teen years, that spending tons and tons of time together. Maybe they're in school together. We're in a pandemic, but imagine life is normal. You know, they're in school together. They do their after school activities. They hang out after school and on weekends, and it can be around the clock thing. So having time apart, having separate interests, those are all elements of a healthy relationship. Some of the elements of an unhealthy relationship might include things like jealousy, controlling the partner, trying to control the partner, isolation, maybe asking a partner to drop their interests, spend more time with you, or drop friends. Um, Could be emotional manipulation, maybe guilt
Wow.
tripping, pressure around things, pressure to escalate the relationship, right? Maybe moving too fast. So those are some of the elements of an unhealthy relationship. Some people call those red flags. Some people call those, that's a toxic relationship. So there's like different words for it, really.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Well, yeah, definitely. I definitely got to say that communication and respect is two just really important elements. Just in any relationship, teen, adult, anything of that sort. For my next question, I would like to ask, what is the definition of intimate partner violence?
Thank you for that. I think that it gets a little confusing because we talk about unhealthy and toxic
Yeah,
relationships. So, what makes something abusive versus unhealthy? I think that the definition of an intimate partner violence relationship is when one person is using a pattern of these abusive behaviors to have control and power over another person. So, in other words, maybe there could be in an unhealthy relationship, there could be some cheating, lying, jealousy between two individuals, but really, intimate partner violence is a pattern of all of those things, the manipulation, isolation, jealousy, control, to have power over the other partner, to restrict their movements, to control the speed and everything else that happens in a relationship. This could include emotional abuse. It could include physical abuse. It could include
yeah,
financial abuse. There's a lot of categories. And we can also talk about sexual abuse as well, like reproductive coercion, pushing somebody to have sex, or not talking about protection, not talking about reproductive health care, those kinds of things.
yeah.
So it's not always physical violence. It can include physical violence and it can be very serious, but it can also be emotional, sexual, and financial as well.
True. Wow. Um, how? Well, sorry. What is what does consent look like well, in a healthy relationship? What does consent look like actually?
That's a great question. I think people feel that maybe once you're in a relationship, things change and maybe you can express more entitlement to your partner's body, or maybe because you've already done certain physical things that now we don't need to be talking as much about consent. But I think that consent is always important. Just because one person has engaged in sexual activity in the past doesn't mean that they're a blank slate to continue a sexual activity. Consent is just really important in a relationship and out of a relationship. And that could be hand holding, kissing, all the way up into
Yeah,
sexual activity. So the definition doesn't vary whether or not you're in or out of a relationship. The onus is on the initiator. So the person seeking sexual contact with the other person needs to make sure that other person is consenting. It can be withdrawn at any time. So if someone's engaging in some kind of activity and they decide that they don't want to do it for any reason, they're not into it, that's when it stops. And there should not be continued coercion, pressure, guilt tripping, and so on after that point. I said a little earlier that it needs to be renewed each time. So just because someone's agreed to do something in the past doesn't mean that they agree to do it in the future. Every time you engage, you need to be making sure at every stage, is this still okay? How does this feel? And it can't be given by somebody who is incapacitated, so someone who's intoxicated, someone who's asleep. And of course, yes is not consent either. So we were talking about those unhealthy dynamics where maybe someone's guilting or pressuring the other person or making threats around sex. If you don't do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to leave. If you don't do X, Y, and Z, I might hurt myself, like these kinds of things, or guilting.
yeah,
And if someone then is feeling that way and then says yes, that's not really consent either. So it needs to be free, enthusiastic consent.
yes, definitely. Yeah, these are definitely things that we might be able to observe sometimes in our own relationships, sometimes in others, and it's definitely very important that people understand that things have to be willing and not forced or trying to really pressure certain answers or responses from people.
Right.
I would like to ask, what is the best way for someone to express boundaries with their partner, and how can someone address a partner who they believe is mistreating them?
Thank you for that question. When I talk to people about boundaries, I like to ask, when is the best time to set a boundary? And the truth is that a boundary, if we were born with a list of boundaries and you're like, here they are, but boundaries are ever evolving. Boundaries can change during a relationship, right? So someone could come into a relationship with some boundaries and that might either change or they might develop new boundaries. So setting a boundary is really about staying in touch with yourself first, number one. So considering what are you comfortable with and what are you not comfortable with? What maybe something was okay before and then becomes not okay. So the way to set a boundary is by using I statements. Another important element of boundaries is that it is not about controlling the other person. So a boundary can't be, you have to call me at 8 p.m. every night, right? A boundary is about the behavior. It's the behavior you receive from the other partner.
Yes.
In other words, so maybe you like to be talked to a certain way. Maybe you have boundaries around your phone, maybe boundaries around your time and space, physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, emotional boundaries. And it's really about the behavior you're receiving. What's tougher is then when someone violates those boundaries, because that could be a serious violation of boundaries where the relationship must end then, or it could be something where, maybe it's think about the phone and now you have to check this person again, or they use a phrase that you told them you wouldn't want to hear, or be referred to by a word that you don't want to be referred to by. And people have to determine the outcome. So
Yes.
that's the difficult part of boundaries, that now you have to have a
Yes.
consequence. So it's not easy because you have to tell somebody you care about, like, it hurt my feelings when, I feel hurt when. And then being ready to act on a boundary assertion if it's been violated, being ready to say, I can walk away from this relationship if my boundaries are being violated, I'm no longer comfortable. And deciding that you can disengage whatever you need to do. And that can be really hard too.
Definitely. Well, what would be some tips that you would give young people to establish healthy relationships in the future?
Yeah, I think it's just very tough, first of all, I'll say, because we get messages about relationships all the time, whether we learn them from our family or whether we learn them from social media, couple goals, things like that. I see a lot of relationship TikToks that are giving advice, but I think really seeking out expert advice, some of the content we talked about today about what makes a relationship healthy. SAVI has great resources. There are other great programs in New York City that talk about this.
Yeah.
And also keeping in mind how you feel, always trusting your gut. Even having a list in front of you about trusting and honesty and communication still does not always translate to how things feel. So I would say always being in touch with your own feelings, always making sure that you express how you feel. I think it's definitely young people may not feel assertive to say, this doesn't feel good anymore. I could list every red flag, but the biggest red flags are how you feel in a relationship. Do you feel free to come and go? Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells? Do you feel like you're being controlled? Or do you feel like fearful that your partner's going to react a certain way when you're going about your day? Do you feel like you're anxious looking at your phone because you're worried your partner is going to be texting you 55 times because you haven't answered? So those are really the things when you go looking for those healthy relationships. How do you feel? Do you feel supported? Do you feel safe? Do you feel happy? And start from there.
Yes, definitely. I believe that just understanding how you feel, how your partner feels, and knowing how to communicate with your partner is just really essential. And now, we have COVID and things are getting a lot harder, a lot more virtual. How do you believe that the pandemic has affected relationships now?
I think that the pandemic has definitely put a strain on people's relationships. Sometimes it brings people together. I can't say it's all negative, but I think that it puts a lot of obstacles, especially for young people who may not be physically together because they're not in school or for any other reason. So I think that it's really important to figure out ways to stay connected to your partner. And there's so many considerations there. Maybe texting feels stressful because now you're reading into their text to see, like, why did they put a period there? What is this supposed to mean?
Yeah.
They don't use any emojis. So making sure you have time to connect in other ways, such as a phone call, FaceTiming, playing a video game together online, watching a Netflix show from your separate places and texting each other. And asking about love languages can be really helpful too. Maybe that person's love language is words of affirmation, so making sure you give them that. Maybe that person's love language is quality time, so finding time to go for a walk, or, like I said, doing an activity from afar, like watching a movie and playing video games and things like that. And if things are getting really tense, figure out ways to express, using I statements. I feel upset when, and trying to make sure that you're saying things in a way that's not blaming the other person, or saying you made me feel this way or you're doing this and that. So I statements are helpful.
Yeah.
I think those are some tips for navigating the pandemic.
Yes, definitely. How can we help someone who's experiencing domestic violence or just any kind of abuse?
I think that the first step is to believe survivors. I think that a lot of the time when people come out, they're worried about hearing, why didn't you do this or that, right? Judgmental statements, or doesn't seem that serious to me. All they did was this and that, right? So you're believing somebody. You're seeking help if you're a minor and you need to get adults involved, getting somebody else involved, especially if there's a fear for somebody's safety, right? Maybe that person is in physical danger and you're worried about them, or they might be in danger of hurting themselves. That's a good time to be reaching out for other people's support. And then letting people know about the resources available to them SAVI is completely free and confidential. There is care that can be had at SAVI, including safety planning and considering what needs to be done if someone's considering leaving one of these kinds of relationships, right? And trying not to be judgmental. I think that
Definitely.
when you're supporting a friend or someone and they're saying maybe they're going through this cycle of abuse and you're hearing it over and over again and you're getting frustrated and worried, not blaming that person, but saying, I'm concerned for your safety. What you're telling me is really scary. It sounds really scary, and I'm really worried about you, and I really care about you. And kind of coming from that place of concern, even when maybe you want to be like, please, I really want you to change the situation. That person is the expert on their own experience and whatever situation they're surviving, right? So they're constantly taking in information about their safety. They're always thinking about the ways they're engaging with their partner. So they're the expert, and you're just trying to empower that person to make better decisions for them by giving them the resources.
Yes, definitely. So how can friends or family maybe show support for someone who's experiencing verbal or physical abuse? And how can schools help families and teens dealing with teen violence?
Right, definitely. I think definitely some of those things I mentioned before, supporting that person by saying, I believe you, not victim blaming somebody, which is using language like, why did you go back to that person? Why did you go there? Don't you know how they are? Or saying, I think that another important thing to think about is that these relationships that are abusive thrive on the isolation.
Yes.
So maybe someone, friend or family, is supporting this person so much, and then they're starting to feel worn down. They're like, I can't hear about this anymore, so I'm gonna back off. I can't hear about this anymore. It's okay to have boundaries, but also now that person's support network is shrinking.
Yeah.
So keeping that line, like maybe if you are setting a boundary with a friend who's going through this or a family member, and say, these are the two things I can do for you, right? If you want to talk about this, I can give you resources and I can, give you the SAVI number, but I can't be on call 24 hours a day and go through the emotional ups and downs with you. So trying to think about your own boundaries, but also keeping the door open that you still want to hear from that person and know that they're okay. And as for schools, I think schools can make sure that they get programming about what healthy relationships are. So people who are experiencing these kinds of harms can know that they are in that relationship and need help, as well as having clear guidelines for when these things occur. So what if two students are in an abusive relationship, and what are your guidelines as a teacher or a staff member? A lot of schools, even K through 12, use the Title IX office to report these kinds of incidences, and making sure that students are receiving some kind of repercussion if sexual harassment or sexual abuse is going on as well.
Yes. Wow. So what are some resources that SAVI offers?
So SAVI offers completely free and confidential services. We offer services in the emergency room. So if someone goes after an incident of sexual assault or intimate partner violence, we can send an advocate. Right now we're doing it all by phone, to make sure that person has their rights and resources and options explained to them and emotionally supported. We have totally free counseling as well for survivors of sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and human trafficking. And we also collaborate and have great relationships with other programs in the city. So I'm going to shout out Day One and Hollaback and Safe Horizon and the Crime Victim Treatment Center of New York City as other great programs that people can reach out to as well for different services, but same thing, kind of in these categories of sexual assault, intimate partner violence, and sometimes human trafficking.
Yes. Well, Lindsey, thank you for your time. Thank you for giving us some really great insight about setting boundaries, communicating with our partners, understanding just strong components of healthy relationships, understanding the difference between a healthy and maybe unhealthy relationship. I will now be opening up the comments for anyone who might have any comments or questions for maybe Lindsey or I. You'll have the ability to do so. Well, I guess we answered the people's questions. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Thank you for educating us. It was really wonderful to have you and to really learn so much about just SAVI and understand these very important components. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.